The night 400 homes went dark, people said I ruined Christmas. That's the version that spread through town before sunrise, before anyone bothered asking who actually owned the power feeding that giant holiday display. Funny thing about electricity, it never cares about opinions. It only follows the wire, and every inch of that wire belonged to me. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 59 years old, and after 36 years as an industrial electrical contractor, I thought retirement meant fewer emergencies, quieter mornings, and finally enough time to build custom furniture in the workshop behind my house. My wife, Linda, likes to joke that I retired from fixing factories only to spend every afternoon arguing with pieces of walnut that refused to become dining tables. Honestly, she wasn't wrong. Our place sits on the corner of Cedar Hollow, an older neighborhood outside Grand Ridge where most people wave when they drive by. Kids still ride bicycles until dinner. And every December, somebody decides Christmas decorations should be visible from outer space. When we bought this property almost 20 years earlier, the workshop already had its own commercial-grade transformer because the previous owner had run heady woodworking equipment. I spent a small fortune modernizing everything, signed my own utility agreement, upgraded the service, installed new disconnects, and paid every permit fee without complaining because I believed ownership came with responsibility. Most of my neighbors never understood why that gray transformer sat behind my fence. They assumed it belonged to the utility company because it looked official. It didn't. It belonged to me, just like my truck, my mailbox, and every machine inside my shop. Most folks never needed to know that until one man decided my property was simply another community resource waiting to be claimed. His name was Trevor Collins. Every neighborhood has someone like Trevor, loud enough to sound confident, friendly enough to collect volunteers, ambitious enough to mistake popularity for authority. He wasn't president of the homeowners committee because we didn't even have a formal HOA, but he somehow became chairman of the annual Christmas festival after organizing one successful light competition years ago. Before long, he was talking about sponsorships, local newspapers, food vendors, trolley tours, charity raffles, souvenir mugs, and expanding our little neighborhood tradition into something people would drive across the county to see. At first, nobody minded. Families had fun, local businesses made money, and kids loved it. I even admired his energy. Last December, he came over carrying a box of extension cords and asked if he could plug one strand of decorative lights into an outlet on my garage because the public circuit kept tripping. He asked politely. I said yes. He thanked me, brought over homemade cookies a week later, and I figured that was the end of it. Turns out that single favor became the foundation for the biggest mistake he ever made. Around the middle of November the following year, I started hearing construction noises earlier than usual. Pickup trucks rolled through the neighborhood before breakfast. Ladders leaned against trees. Crews wrapped poles with lights. And somebody was stringing cable across several front yards. I barely paid attention because retirement had taught me one valuable lesson. Not every problem belongs to me anymore. Then one afternoon I noticed two men wearing reflective vests working near the fence behind my workshop. I walked outside, asked if they needed anything, and one of them smiled without really looking at me. He said they were helping with the holiday display and Trevor had already approved everything. I remember thinking that was an odd answer because Trevor didn't own my backyard. But they packed up before I could ask another question. A couple of weeks passed. Life stayed ordinary. Linda decorated the front porch. I finished a walnut rocking chair for our granddaughter. We planned Christmas dinner. Then my utility bills showed up. I actually laughed the first time I looked at it because I assumed the company had mailed someone else's statement by accident. My average bill rarely changed much during winter, but this one was over $1,800 higher than normal, and nothing in my workshop had been running long enough to explain it. I checked every machine. I checked every breaker. I even shut off the workshop for an entire afternoon and watched the meter continue spinning faster than it ever should have. That's the moment an old electrician's instincts took over. You spend enough years chasing electrical faults. You stop trusting coincidences. Electricity always leaves clues if you're patient enough to follow them. And I had a feeling those clues were about to lead me somewhere that nobody in Cedar Hollow expected. The next morning, I grabbed my old voltage tester, a flashlight, a clipboard that had been riding around in my truck since before my retirement party, and started tracing every inch of my service line the way I would have done on a factory job. The funny thing about working around electricity for most of your life is that you stop looking where people tell you to look and start looking where they hope you won't. Everything inside my workshop checked out perfectly. Every breaker carried the right load. Every panel was clean. Every connection looked exactly the way I'd left it. That meant the problem wasn't inside my system. It was somewhere beyond it. I followed the conduit behind the fence until I noticed fresh dirt where the grass had been disturbed. Then I found a brand new junction box tucked behind a row of decorative shrubs that hadn't even been there 2 weeks earlier. Whoever installed it had tried to hide it with fake landscaping. But they made one mistake every amateur makes. They left clean fingerprints in a dirty world. Fresh conduit, fresh screws, fresh sealant. Nothing matched the weathering on the rest of my equipment. I opened the cover and just stood there for a second because I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. Someone had spliced a heavy feeder directly into my private service, then routed it underground toward the neighborhood park where Trevor's Christmas festival was taking shape. This wasn't somebody plugging into an outdoor outlet anymore. This wasn't borrowing power for a few lights. This was an unauthorized permanent connection designed to feed hundreds of displays, vendor booths, music systems, inflatable decorations, and who knew what else. I took nearly 100 photographs before touching anything. Then I called the utility company. An old friend of mine named Mike happened to be the field supervisor covering our district that week. We'd worked together on industrial projects years before, and after hearing my voice, he laughed and said, "Danny, retirement getting boring already?" I told him I'd rather be bored than write about what I was looking at. 2 hours later, he pulled into my driveway with another lineman. They inspected everything without saying much. Then Mike finally looked at me and shook his head. "Everything after that pole belongs to you. Nobody has authority to tap this line without your written approval and proper permits. Whoever did this has created a liability nightmare." Hearing it, confirmed by the utility, mattered because now it wasn't just my opinion. It was documented. Mike handed me copies of his inspection report before leaving and quietly added, "Don't touch anything yet. Let them keep digging the hole." I knew exactly what he meant. Sometimes the smartest move isn't stopping somebody the moment they break the rules. Sometimes you let them believe they're getting away with it, while every extra step becomes another piece of evidence. That afternoon, I pulled the property survey from my filing cabinet, found the original installation permits, my transformer purchase agreement, inspection certificates, maintenance records, and utility contract. Linda watched me spread paperwork across the dining room table like I was preparing for trial. She poured me coffee and smiled the way only someone married to an electrician for 30 years can smile. "You're already building the case, aren't you?" I shrugged. "I'm just organizing facts," she laughed. "Which is your version of declaring war." She wasn't entirely wrong. By the following morning, I requested a meeting with Trevor. We met beside the park where volunteers were hanging giant illuminated snowflakes from steel poles. The place looked like a movie set. Food trucks were reserving parking spaces. Vendors were building cocoa stands. Local radio stations were setting up broadcast equipment. Trevor greeted me with his usual salesman grin before I even opened my mouth. "Danny, wait until you see opening night. This year's going to be unbelievable." I handed him a folder instead. He looked confused until he saw the photographs. His smile disappeared for maybe 3 seconds before coming back even bigger. "Almost rehearsed." "Oh, that?" "Yeah, the contractor mentioned using your transformer. We figured it made the most sense." I stared at him. "You figured?" He nodded. "The public service couldn't handle the extra load, and yours had plenty of capacity. It's helping the community." I asked him the simplest question I could think of. "Did anybody ask me?" His answer still amazes me when I remember it. "Well, you let us use power last year, so we assumed you wouldn't mind." Assumed? Such an innocent little word. It has started more lawsuits than bad intentions ever could. I explained exactly what the utility company had confirmed. Private transformer, private service, private liability, unauthorized electrical work, unlicensed installation, insurance exposure. Every sentence made his expression harder, but not because he felt guilty, because he hated being told no. "Come on, Danny," he finally said, lowering his voice. "Don't make this into a thing. The whole neighborhood's counting on this festival." I answered just as quietly. "You made it into a thing the day somebody climbed over my fence and tied into equipment you don't own." He crossed his arms. "So what do you want?" "Everything disconnected within 72 hours. He actually laughed. "That's impossible." "No," I replied. "It's inconvenient." "Those are different words." He walked away before I finished talking, shouting over his shoulder that I was overreacting. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived in my mailbox. For one ridiculous second, I thought maybe he was apologizing. Instead, it informed me that the Christmas committee had secured temporary power continuity in support of community activities and thanked me for my cooperation. Thanked me. My cooperation. There were 3 signatures at the bottom, as if writing their names on expensive paper somehow transferred ownership of my property. Linda read the letter twice before setting it down. They really believe this protects them? I said. No. They believe confidence protects them. My attorney, Sarah Whitfield, had a different opinion. She reviewed every document, every photograph, every inspection report, then looked across her desk and asked one question. Daniel, do you actually want compensation, or do you want compliance? I thought about that longer than she probably expected. Money wasn't really the issue anymore. $1,800 hurt. Sure, but I could survive that. What bothered me was watching people decide that ownership became optional whenever enough neighbors voted against it. If they could take electricity because they thought the cause was noble, what stops somebody from taking land, water, equipment, or anything else tomorrow? Compliance, I answered. Then let's give them every opportunity to make the right decision. She drafted a formal cease and desist package with copies of the survey, inspection reports, property records, and a clear 72-hour deadline to remove every unauthorized connection. It was delivered by courier, emailed to every committee member, and mailed by certified post for good measure. Trevor responded with a voicemail instead. I still have it saved. He laughed through most of the message, called me the neighborhood Grinch, accused me of trying to destroy children's Christmas memories, then ended with, "You won't actually do anything because you know everyone will hate you." I listened to it twice before deleting nothing. Sarah immediately told me to preserve it as evidence. Meanwhile, the festival kept growing. Television crews announced opening weekend. Hundreds of advance tickets were sold online. Tour buses confirmed reservations. Every extra decoration they installed drew more electricity through equipment they had absolutely no legal right to touch. Mike from the utility called me the day before December 23rd and asked one simple question. Have they disconnected yet? I looked out my workshop window at another truck unloading lights. Not even close. He paused before saying, "Then I hope you've got your paperwork in order." I smiled, looked over at the neatly organized folders stacked across my workbench, and quietly answered, "Better than they've got theirs." As sunset approached on December 23rd, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. Children bundled in winter coats raced toward the park with cups of hot chocolate. Music echoed between the houses. Television cameras searched for the perfect opening shot, and I stood alone beside the locked disconnect switch behind my fence, listening to the steady hum of the transformer that had suddenly become the most important piece of property in Cedar Hollow. I wish I could tell you I stood there feeling triumphant, but the truth is I mostly felt disappointed. I had lived in Cedar Hollow for almost 2 decades, shared barbecue grills with these people, shoveled snow off elderly neighbors' driveways, fixed broken outlets for free more times than I could count, and now I was about to become the villain in a story they had written without ever asking for my side. At exactly 7:12, the festival announcer began counting down over the loudspeakers. Kids screamed with excitement. The crowd started clapping in rhythm. Television cameras pointed toward the giant Christmas tree in the center of the park, and Trevor stood on stage waving like he'd just been elected governor. I looked one last time at my phone. No apology. No confirmation that the legal connection had been removed. Nothing. I unlocked the disconnect, wrapped my hand around the handle, took one slow breath, and pulled it down in one clean motion. The humming stopped instantly. Then the lights disappeared. Every string of bulbs, gone. Every inflatable, flat within seconds. The music died in the middle of a Christmas song. Vendor booths lost power. Cash registers shut off. 400 homes that had been tied into Trevor's showcase sat in complete darkness, while the only sounds left were confused voices and a few children asking their parents what had happened. It was the quietest Christmas crowd I had ever heard. Less than 2 minutes later, someone was pounding on my front door hard enough to shake the windows. Trevor stormed onto my porch red-faced and furious. "Have you completely lost your mind?" he shouted. "Do you realize what you've done?" I calmly handed him a folder containing copies of my deed, the utility inspection, the cease and desist notice, and proof that he had ignored every warning. He slapped the papers against his leg without even reading them. "People paid to be here," I answered. "Then maybe you should explain why you sold tickets using electricity you didn't own." His face changed the moment I said the word sold, not because he suddenly understood the theft, but because he realized I knew far more than he thought I did. Sarah had already started digging into public records after hearing about the ticket sales, and what she found was remarkable. Trevor's committee had collected tens of thousands of dollars over several holiday seasons through admissions, vendor fees, sponsorships, and merchandise. Yet there was no registered business entity, no proper licensing for commercial events, questionable insurance coverage, and very little accounting anyone could actually verify. Before the cocoa in those booths had gone cold, Sarah's legal notices had reached every committee member by email, and by Christmas morning, the local newspaper wasn't running a story about a bitter retiree and ruining the holidays. The headline read much differently. It focused on unauthorized electrical connections, possible code violations, and questions surrounding festival finances. Once reporters started asking real questions, everything unraveled faster than Trevor could invent new excuses. City inspectors arrived after the holiday weekend. The utility company issued formal violation reports. The electrical contractor Trevor claimed had approved everything denied authorizing the installation. It turned out the man who actually tied into my service wasn't licensed at all. Insurance investigators wanted answers. The finance department wanted records. The fire marshal wanted permits. Suddenly, everyone who had confidently signed letters beside Trevor's name stopped returning phone calls. Within 2 weeks, the festival committee dissolved. One member resigned publicly. Another quietly moved away that spring. Trevor paid substantial fines related to the unauthorized electrical work and spent months dealing with investigators over the event operations. We never saw another interview where he called himself the voice of the neighborhood. Then something happened I honestly didn't expect. About a month later, Trevor knocked on my door again. This time, there were no cameras, no audience, no speeches. Just him standing on my porch, holding a box of pastries from the bakery Linda liked downtown. He looked tired, older somehow. Pride has a way of aging people when reality finally catches up with it. He said, "I should have asked." 4 simple words, maybe the first honest sentence I'd ever heard from him. I invited him inside, poured 2 cups of coffee, and told him the problem had never been Christmas lights. It had never been helping neighbors. It had been the belief that enough enthusiasm could replace permission, and enough popularity could erase property rights. By the time he left, we had drafted the framework for something much simpler than all the chaos that came before. If the neighborhood wanted to use my electrical service in future holiday seasons, we'd do it legally. Written lease, fixed weekly fee paid in advance, licensed electricians only, proof of insurance, immediate termination if any payment or safety requirement was ignored, no handshakes, no assumptions, no community pressure, just clear rules that protected everyone involved. They signed that agreement before the following December, and believe it or not, the next Christmas festival ran smoother than any year before because everyone finally understood where the boundaries were. Funny how respect usually costs a lot less than arrogance. Looking back now, people still ask me if I regret pulling that switch, and my answer never changes. I regret that it became necessary. I regret that common courtesy disappeared long before the lights did. But I don't regret defending something I spent years building with my own hands, because if you surrender your rights simply to avoid making other people uncomfortable, eventually you won't have any rights left to defend. So now I'm curious what you think. If you had discovered your neighbors secretly tapping into your private power, would you have cut the electricity the moment you found it? Or would you have given them one last chance like I did? Let me know down in the comments because stories like this always spark strong opinions. And I'd genuinely like to hear where you would have drawn the line.